Hi, and welcome to the LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM Manufacturing PMI Report. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and editor for Inside Supply Management. That is Institute for Supply Management's member publication, and we're glad that you've joined us as we break down the manufacturing PMI for February. Now, whether motivated by tariffs or not, the buying activity continued for U.S. manufacturing in February. Good activity on new orders, backlogs, and exports kept the composite PMI in expansion at 52.4%. But we're likely going to talk about two recent events that will have a big impact on the March data. That's the Supreme Court decision on tariffs a week and a half ago, and this past weekend's strikes in Iran by U.S. and Israeli forces that commenced on Saturday and are ongoing. And if you noted what happened with the prices index already, those two recent developments might cause a little bit more uncertainty and indigestion. We'll talk about that a lot today, I'm sure. As always, there is much to discuss, so let's bring in Susan Spence. She's the chair of the ISM Manufacturing Business Survey Committee. Sue, a month ago, we were thinking that the January expansion was due to end of year and tariffs motivated buying, but this PMI stayed in expansion for another month. So, before we get to the recent news, I guess, just give us your opening statement, so to speak, for February.
Sure thing. Good morning, afternoon, evening for everybody, wherever you're calling from. Happy you're here. We were very happy to see a second month in expansion, although we did lose some ground in those demand indicators. So at 52.4, we'll take it. I'll get to the price index in a bit. The expansion continued in new orders. Backlog had a big gain, which is expected after a couple of months of new order. Ironically or coincidentally, depending on how you view that word, one of the only big six manufacturing sectors that did not see expansion was petroleum and coal. I think probably that'll be different this time next month, depending on how long this conflict in the Middle East lasts. But in any event, we had computer electronic products, chemical products, machinery, transportation equipment, all expand. So really happy about that. Customer inventory, it's kind of flat. It's a little bit up from last month. I think that starts to increase every month. We have some additional orders. So we have some more certainty with the Supreme Court ruling, of course, but we have other ways that tariffs can be lobbied. So we are optimistic, but there are structural things that still are up in the air. What other tariffs will be there? The conflict that we now find ourselves in, I think we're going to have some short-term pricing effects, probably logistic effects for the commodities that come out of that region. But overall, we still have panelists pretty optimistic as they were in the semi-forecast. And sentiment-wise, we've had another month of positive sentiment on demand. So two people being positive on demand for every negative person. That was the same as last month. And interestingly enough, even though employment is still in contraction, it got a little better. And the ratio of people hiring versus not hiring is down to 1 to 1.4. That's the best it's been since last summer. So whether customers are finally loosening up purse strings and ordering, don't know yet. The SCOTUS impact, will it drive folks to start ordering where they had not? Well, you've seen in the news a couple of areas of the world like the EU and India putting their trade agreements on hold, trying to figure out what the implications are. So I think we still have uncertainty. We are not in expansion yet in employment. So I do think we need a couple of more months to see what happens and then see what the fallout might be with maybe Section 122 and 232 tariffs.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the data for February. There are certain news events that happen. I mean, you know this in your short experience as chair that, even if they happen a little bit too late in the month and don't have anything to do with that data that was collected, you're definitely going to get questions on it over the course of your interview rounds on the day. And as soon as the news broke on Saturday, obviously, we knew that, the conflict in Iran was going to be that kind of issue in question. So let's, it's been a definite point of interest in the interviews you've done today just talk about some of the, immediate implications for supply managers. We've talked about the Strait of Hormuz and the oil availability and pricing. And you also talked about, it's always another lesson about matters of risk that supply chain managers should always know. So yeah, just to dive into that a little bit.
Sure. The news on Friday just reminded me that a supply manager, purchasing manager needs to do the scenario playing even when times are peaceful and not chaotic. I know when I worked, frankly, didn't always take advantage of that because it wasn't the pressure of a crisis, at least that day. So as we think about what's going on in that part of the world and the implications for prices, not just around oil, if we think about the political risks that we have, frankly, with economic policy being used as a leverage tool, even though the highest court in the land has said you can't do that, at least with IEEPA tariffs. It's a reminder, I think, to all of the folks in this profession that you need to have a really good handle on the risk rating, if you will, of the things you buy, right? So one thing that we did at FedEx, although a lot of this was not in place when I arrived there, it was a little surprising. We ended up deciding that we couldn't worry about everything. It's impossible. And so we did a risk rating category by category, whether it was jet fuel or trucks or IT services. And we asked ourselves, if we ran out of this supply because there was a conflict or a war or a natural weather event, how quickly do we think the business would be impacted? And from there, we had a risk rating for a category, and that drove us to decide, okay, if we're sole sourced here, we absolutely have to have a second source. Maybe it was a domestic source if the risk we happened to be looking at was economic, political, societal, whatever. So it's a reminder to understand where the points of impact are for you and to have your contingency plans focused on that. I had someone once tell me, it was someone that worked for a government agency, that they risk rated everything. And my question to them is, okay, then what are your contingencies plan? Well, we have to have them on everything. Well, how do you do that? And it turns out you can't. You don't have an army of people. So that's important. And, we had, even within a category like jet fuel, we had 150 suppliers around the world, but not all of them, were the only source in town. In Alaska, we had 5. So we probably didn't spend a lot of time worrying about them, but we sure did worry about the guys in Memphis because there was 1, right? So it's a reminder that things are going to happen. You are going to be impacted, and you got to survive it with as little negative, impact to your company as possible. And you do that by thinking through these scenarios. The world has given us enough scenarios to, pretend, war games, they used to call that, right?
Yeah.
What could happen? All right, if we run out of this thing, here's what's going to happen. How many weeks of inventory do I have on the shelf? It seems very basic. I was always surprised not enough people were thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you at ismworld.org, we'll have a lot of coverage on this and the impact it means for supply chains. So stick a pin on that. I know that we'll be talking about the impacts in March as it regards to the hostilities in Iran. The topic that I thought I was going to be talking to you a lot about today, I actually talked to you a little bit last week on it, and we were, your comments were a big part of a nice comprehensive article that was on ISM's website. I believe Christina will put it in the chat if she hasn't already, about the potential impact about the Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs. You've talked about it a little bit so far, but I mean, since we last talked, you've had a few days to ponder on it a little bit more. How do you see the lay of the land?
So I've been studying up a little bit on all these different tariffs, and probably folks in the audience are already. Almost within an hour of that Supreme Court ruling coming out, there was certainly a lot of information out there about Section 122. These are the tariffs that can be put in place for 150 days, supposedly at a max of 15%, right? And the president came out immediately with, we're going to go ahead and use those at 10%, and the next morning it was 15. There are panelists in our report that talk about Section 232, right? Those are the duties on imports that are deemed a threat to national security: steel and aluminum, 25 and 10% respectively. Last year, lumber and autos and cars were included, some up to 50%. So like the other risks, you can call this one a political risk, although it's an economic risk too. I think what folks have to be thinking about is, don't assume just because IEEPA was struck down that they aren't going to come back in a different form. It's been pretty much said that way. So understanding in your bill of materials, what are your base raw materials, which tariff could apply, and then go study, what that impact could be, again, do worst case scenario. What the customers are going to do, both domestic and international, is, kind of up in the air. But so far, the behavior up until 2 months ago was to not order. And so I think you have to, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, but then your own sources and your own cost increases, what could that be? I was asked this morning by one of the reporters, do you think companies will just start buying domestically now, and the things that are impacted either by the Gulf War or these new tariffs? It's like, well, that would be great if you could flick a switch, but you can't. So it's going to be a constant refinement of the risk strategy for whatever lever is being, toggled on any given day.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue into the index that you alluded on it in your introduction, and it was most exemplified in the situation that we're talking about. And I'll tee that up with I usually share a comment that stood out from the month, and for this month it was from a respondent in machinery, and he or she said, trade policy changes affect costs and decisions due to the tariffs. Most raw materials used in manufacturing, such as steel and wire, need to be sourced domestically, and the cost keeps going up. And boy, did the prices index, Sue, as you know, exemplify that in February. It went up 11.5 percentage points to 70.5%. That's the highest reading since June of 2022, when it was 78.5. Steel and aluminum continue to be primary drivers, as well as, the tariffs on imported goods were definitely an impact. So just discuss that situation.
Yeah, I would love to tell you that we saw 70.5 coming. I was very surprised at that, only because it's been a little tamer since the summer, but it is what it is. I would love to tell you that it was exactly because certain tariffs finally made their way through. Nobody knows. Nobody knows that. But again, petroleum products and things coming through the Strait of Hormuz aside, because I think you can expect a spike there. It is very interesting to me that spike happened. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe not. I think last week the core PPI came out at a big surprise. I think the number was 3.6. I have to go check my my numbers there. And so the question is inflation back? Is it coming roaring back? What do we do about that? It's not good because of what's going to happen with the input price, and then tariffs on top of that, and so we have tariff chaos. We have this spike in prices. Maybe we have an inflation problem that's getting worse in the country, maybe not, but it was just very interesting how that happened. And now you have the conflict over in the Middle East on top of it. So buckle up. I am encouraged that employment crept a little bit closer to expansion. 48.8, I believe, was our number. So that also got me thinking about the Fed's dual mandate, right? Steady employment, full employment as possible, and low inflation. Well, if the 70.5 and maybe the core PC are indicators that's going in the wrong direction, but employment's being stable, right? Or more stable than it was. Typically, what does that mean for an interest rate cut? It usually means they're going to hold, right? So we will see, but again, go back to, the risk analysis, frame of mind. You may need to source domestically for other reasons, but nobody really can do it that quickly, depending on the sector. Some may be able to do it quicker than others. So it's a worrisome factor, but we will see where the other sectors go. The sentiment, which I think we talked about in the beginning, the sentiment's better. The sentiment about hiring is better. Yes, it's been for a while. So we'll see if it holds, but it really, as always, depends on what these customers are going to do. Are they going to order? Are they going to, take advantage of maybe a window of, SCOTUS's has shut down IEEPA, and then there's threats of these other tariffs. What's going to happen with refunds? It's more uncertainty, but a big piece of the picture is now settled. It's just how much of that tariff revenue can be gotten in other ways, and then what's the impact after that.
Before we get to the demand numbers that were, in many ways they were still encouraging, that import index number, while we're talking about tariffs, 54.9% in February, that was the highest since 2022. Did that number surprise you too? It did me.
The input indicator, which imports are, not really. I feel like if the prices aside, if the other indicators are headed toward expansion, that one's eventually going to be right. So we've had 2 months of new orders in expansion. We've had 4 months now of production and expansion, even though it lost some ground. Inventories are up. Customer inventories are just slightly up. And new export orders are 2 months in a row. That's up slightly, kind of more flattish. I think the assumption I have is that imports are a section of, the inputs. And so if everything else is going up, that's eventually going to be, especially as customers reorder. I don't believe you can say it's because people knew that, the tariffs were going to get knocked down, at least IEEPA, although prediction markets had the bets going that way. I think it's just a natural outgrowth of orders are up and eventually those are up too. Not unlike backlog, which took a 5-point leap, but think about it. If the front of the pipeline has a couple months of expansion, well, your backlog's going to swing. The question is, does it stay up or does it go down? Because then that bubble follows as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. They had the demand numbers. They were obviously still encouraging in expansion. Not all of them went up further than they were in January, but that backlog did. It was a 5 percentage point gain from 56.6%. Just talk about some of those demand indicators and what they showed.
Yeah, so backlog, maybe the amount of the increase was a bit of a surprise, but the fact that it continued up, not a surprise. So obviously, you have your new orders, and then as you start producing, the backlog is I call it the whipping process, right? So that's going to go up as well. What the impact is of this price hike, this big price hike on, will it dampen new orders or not? Well, again, I go to some sentiment. The demand sentiment is still quite good, comparably. So this month, second month in a row, every 2 positive comments for every negative. Not that long ago, back in October, it was just about the opposite. For every person saying demand is good, there was 1.7, close to 2 that were saying it's softening. So the combination of our December semi-forecast, where there was optimism despite everything else, and I think a 4% revenue increase was predicted by our panelists, to the first 2 months of the year, demand sentiment still remains stronger rather than weaker. So I think we can expect some continuing there, notwithstanding whatever negative impact there might be of another round of tariffs. My feeling also is if some of these trade policies hold, despite IEEPA not being allowed, if there's a trade deal on the books, even if those are like Europe and India are now being put on hold on their end to try to see the implications. But if we emerge with a trade deal, especially if it's around the 10-15% mark, then that means a little more, to me, stability.
Yeah.
Right. As long as we don't have another round of, we're upset with what you're doing politically, which some people think that's what's being done. And so now we're going to hit you with this other thing. I mean, it's the what's next that is impacting it. So, just like we can't flick a switch and resource and go elsewhere overnight, except in some cases, hopefully our international customers can't either. Although the more time we spend in uncertainty and chaos, the more time they have to go figure out how to do that.
Yeah. Kind of a two-part question here. You had mentioned the employment index earlier, 48.8%. It's a little bit up from January's number, which was 48.1. But the share of respondents indicating head counts were higher and lower at their companies were both up. So make of that what you will. But the second part, you can discuss that those dynamics. But the second part of the question, I was not surprised because we all know what's happening. But a lot of the coverage so far this morning has mentioned the dynamics of AI and data centers and how that could be a big boon to the manufacturing sector, helping employment.
Yeah.
Other dynamics, but employment would be one of them. Just talk about it. Is that something that you're seeing, or a thing that you would buy on?
I think, as we saw in the semi-forecast in December in the special questions we asked, the percent of manufacturing respondents that had anything in place was very low. There was, it was almost like 60% of the panelists said they had nothing in place, but they were looking at it or they were just in piloting. So it feels like we're behind other sectors or other parts of the economy, maybe services, in deploying it, but I am sure it's coming. Can employment backfilling hold off to wait until AI is in place and maybe replacing the person? I'm not sure. It depends how far along people are. There are certain jobs that are very ripe for AI and there's certain jobs that aren't. The question will be how much in the manufacturing sector, how quickly will these companies move to adopt? I also saw a very interesting article that talked about AI is only as good as the information you program into it, much like robotic process automation years ago, much like, in the world of Kaizen and continuous improvement. And back in the day, that was my world. If you have a bad process full of waste, and that's what you're, that's what you're programming into whatever process that you have, that's either robotic process automation or AI, it's not going to be efficient just because it's AI. So the cleansing of the data and the information going into it is really where things fail. And you maybe don't get the return out of AI that you thought you would because you're not doing that work up front. There still needs to be people to do that. So we will see if employment doesn't go back up into a high range of expansion because of that. I think the gap between people thinking about it and doing it is still too big. I think it'll also change in the next maybe 3 to 5 years. It should leap if it's working.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you like these sessions and these conversations that I have with Sue and Steve Miller, he's the chair of the Services Business Survey Committee every month, and you want to see them talk, in person, they're going to be hosting a session at the ISM annual conference on how the ISM PMI reports can help a company's business decisions in areas like forecasting, planning, risk management, and more. ISM World 2026 is April 26th through the 28th in Denver, and you can get more information at ismworld.org/conference. So in the spirit of that announcement, Sue, if I'm a CEO or a high executive, what should I take away or know about this month's data?
Well, given the events over the weekend, I think it is the CEO's opportunity to sit down with their hardworking, very smart supply management professionals and ask them category by category how they rate the risk of those categories. There's something called a PESTLE. You could look it up. It's nothing I invented, but I certainly used it. Risk rating categories along political, economical, societal, technological, legal, environmental, and sometimes reputational risk. And making sure the sourcing plans, the dual sourcing or triple sourcing, the domestic versus international, reflect the risk those categories carry if you do nothing different. That's what the CEO should get into. And sometimes asking those dumb questions spurns action. It's not a dumb question, but hardworking folks, especially if they don't have the head count they used to because people aren't hiring, they don't always have time to think through those strategic implications. But this weekend's events should have everybody thinking about it. It's not unlike the pandemic. And in the pandemic, when the world was shutting down because people were getting sick, you ran out of a lot of stuff. Ironically, the category that we didn't consider very strategic, I don't think anybody did, was safety supplies. And frankly, companies that didn't have gloves or hand sanitizer or masks, they got shut down. They got shut down pretty quickly. So you can't always call that, but the scenario playing is really important. So as a CEO, sit down with the folks running your supply management operations and ask those questions, because you're going to run out of something at some point. And it's a real shame if it's something you might not predict the disaster that's going to cause it to happen, but you ought to be able to scenario play, and you need to give your folks time to do that.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those months. So, I used to say this to Tim Fiore a lot when we were doing this. I wish we had 30 more minutes because we could easily fill them, with the discussion of the index data and what current events mean to it. But yeah, we are coming up at the bottom of the hour here, and we want to respect our viewers' time and know they got to get back to their day. But anything that we haven't talked about, or anything that I haven't asked, or anything that that we haven't touched in the index table here, or the comments that you think is important to point out before we wrap up?
I think we're good. You're very thorough as always. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, super. Yeah, nothing wrong with giving a couple of minutes back to your day. So, hey, thanks a lot for joining us today. And we appreciate you being with us on a busy day. In a bit, you can go to ISM's website to read the roundup article that discusses a lot of what Sue and I have discussed here. And it's a lot. Join us on Wednesday when we'll break down the impact on the services PMI report for February with Steve Miller, the chair of ISM Services Business Survey Committee. And if you want to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing or Services Business Survey panels that help compile data for the ISM PMI reports, go to ISM World/join the panel for more information. So for Sue Spence and the people who helped us behind the scenes, they are Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens. I'm Dan Zeiger, and we will see you on Wednesday.